All right, everyone, welcome to our current session of Water Voices, an ongoing speaker series about the issues that are relevant and a priority to all of us in North Central Florida. My name's Kathy Street. I'm with the Ichetucknee Alliance, one of our sponsoring organizations for this evening. This lovely venue is the High Springs New Century Women's Club. Jane Orr is here as a representative, and I'd like to give her a round of applause because they're always gracious. To allow us to use their venue, and she never gets irritated when we say, I don't know, might be standing room only. We haven't a clue. So we're good to go. John Jopling is here, the president of the Ichetucknee Alliance. We have the vice president of our Santa Fe River, Terry Phelan. I wish Christina Young, the head of the Smithsonian exhibit, our Waterways exhibit here in High Springs, was here tonight. She wasn't able to be with us. If you haven't had a chance to go see that exhibit, you need to. It's a very, very good one. We have two outstanding speakers tonight to talk to us about why water laws in Florida simply are not working. Our first speaker is Heather Ibarra. She is the Associate Director of the Florida Springs Institute. She is on the boards of so many other Springs Institutes. I told her she was going to have to tell you all of them. She has a wealth of experience, knowledge, and background in water issues, especially in this area. Our second speaker is going to be Traci Deen, who is the current director for the Center for Earth Jurisprudence out of Barry University in Orlando. And Traci is a wealth of knowledge about politics, about legislative issues, about water policy. And between the two of them, these women are going to educate us about what we all know, which is when we look around, we say, how could that happen? And they're going to tell us tonight about how it could happen. The very first thing we're going to do this evening is to show you a video. I want everybody to be quiet. There's not going to be audio. And I want to show you a video that was taken at Mill Pond earlier this year on the Ichetucknee River. Please look. Okay, I want you to raise your hand if you remember the Ichetucknee before it looked like that. A lot of folks. I'm not even going to call you old. We are faced with some definite issues. I do want to let you know that we're going to have a question and answer period at the end. Our speakers will save some time, and I will be facilitating that and making sure that everybody's questions get asked of one of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Ibarra.
Thank you, Kathy. Before we begin, I'll just go briefly through my biography. I work for the Howard T. Odom Florida Springs Institute. We're actually located right across the street at the North Florida Springs Environmental Center. So if you haven't been there yet, I encourage you to check it out. We're open from Tuesday to Thursday from 10 to 4, and we're also open on Friday and Saturday, but only 10 to 1. We are having a field school next week. We are officially moving forward with that field school. We're extending registration by a couple of days. The field school is going to be from August 1st through the 4th. Dr. Knight, who's here, is our executive director, and he'll be teaching many of those courses. And we will also have a couple of guest speakers from USGS as well as the Water Management District. And that's going to be an intense course on spring science. We're actually going to go visit Ichetucknee Springs, Cove Springs, and Ginnie Springs during that course. So please check out our website, floridasspringsinstitute.org, to see how you can sign up and be a part of that field school. We do offer the field school every year, so if you can't come this year, we're thinking about retrofitting it and doing it a different way next year to make it easier for folks to attend perhaps on the weekends, not when they're working. So, like I said, I work for the Florida Springs Institute. I'm also an attorney. I'm the associate director at the Florida Springs Institute, so I wear many hats. I got my law degree at Barry University School of Law. I have a distinction in environmental and earth law, which is the same as Traci, who's going to be speaking about environmental and earth law in the form of earth jurisprudence later tonight. My job today is actually to talk to you, let's hope this works, yes, about the current environmental law structure, and also to look at a brief case study of an example of how our environmental law structure isn't the way it's currently being enforced is not working. So there are several key federal environmental laws that our states are required to follow when we're talking about the protection of our waters. The first is the Clean Water Act. There are a lot of nuances of the Clean Water Act, and we really don't have enough time for me to go over everything, so I'm only going to touch on some of the more important points of the Clean Water Act. Specifically, the Clean Water Act is a regulation of point source and non-point source pollutions. And for those who are unfamiliar with water law, point source is basically pollution that we can find a source for that pollution, either through a pipe or some other type of man-made conduit. And non-point source pollution is pollution that we have a harder time finding the source because it's usually the result of runoff from rainfall, or if you're in the northern part of the country, from snowmelt. So the Clean Water Act regulates water quality. When we're talking about environmental issues and we're talking about regulation of those environmental issues, we're talking about water quality and water quantity. But our laws are set up where there's regulation of water quality separate from regulation of water quantity. And when we're trying to deal with these issues, we need to look at both those issues together, not separately. Section 303 of the Clean Water Act is one of the most important parts of the Clean Water Act when we're talking about pollution controls. And it requires that states establish priority rankings for important bodies of water. And also, when those bodies of water are impaired, it requires that they establish a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, which is the maximum allowable amount of pollution that that water body can sustain. Also, the Clean Water Act requires the adoption of an anti-degradation policy, which means that it can't allow further degradation of impaired waters. And there are specific requirements of that in the Clean Water Act under Section 303. The Clean Water Act also requires that if you have a point source pollution issue, that a permit be issued. But when we're talking about non-point source pollution, the Clean Water Act actually leaves it up to the states to develop ways in which they're going to deal with non-point source pollution. And unfortunately, if the state's plan for dealing with non-point source pollution is not working, then the EPA does not have as much power to go in and regulate those specific recovery plans for that particular water body. They have one opportunity to deal with that issue, and that's under Section 319, which is not on the slide, but it allows the EPA to issue funding for certain non-point source pollution programs, and they can use that as kind of the carrot and stick approach by saying, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, we're going to take that funding away. But that's pretty much the only way that they can regulate those non-point source pollution programs and controls after they've already proved the overarching plan for how they're going to tackle those issues. We also have a Safe Drinking Water Act, which allows the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate our drinking water. And we also have the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act, which can be used to argue that a listed or endangered species is being affected by water quality issues or water quantity issues. It's kind of a backdoor approach to dealing with some of our pollution issues in our water, is to argue that there's a species that's being affected by that. We also have state laws that deal with water quality and water quantity. And some of these state laws are, in order to comply with the requirements of the Clean Water Act, the state has passed laws to deal with those requirements and meet those requirements for water quality. The first is the Water Resources Act of 1972, which you can find in Florida Statutes Chapter 373. And that regulates water quantity. When we're talking about water quantity, you often hear the word consumptive use permits. Those are issued by the Water Management District. So in Florida, the water management districts regulate water quantity. They issue permits, and they deal with DEP sets minimum flows and levels, but they make sure that they're supposed to make sure that those minimum flows and levels are being met by how many permits they're issuing. In the Water Management District issue consumptive use permits for any request for withdrawal over 100,000 gallons per day. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily monitor those permits once they've been issued. They issue the permit, and sometimes there's a requirement for reporting, but the permittee does not necessarily have to report, and if it's required, there's no one checking to make sure that they're reporting the correct amount of withdrawals. Under Florida Statutes Chapter 403, we have the regulation of water quality, and this is to meet those requirements in the Clean Water Act that I just went over under Section 303. So the DEP, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, is charged with setting total maximum daily loads for their priority water bodies, and if a total maximum daily load is not being met, they're required to come up with a recovery and prevention strategy. That recovery and prevention Basin Management Action Plan, and there are certain requirements that the Basin Management Action Plan has to meet, including identifying sources of pollution, making sure that best management practices are being implemented on our farms and other agricultural operations, and also identifying projects in order to meet the TMDL and funding sources as well as timeframes for meeting that TMDL. We also have a couple of miscellaneous Florida environmental laws that I think are important to mention here. First is the Outstanding Florida Waters designation, which is under Florida Statute Section 403. The Ichetucknee River was designated an outstanding Florida water in 1984, and yet it's still impaired. What an outstanding Florida water designation means is that that water body gets special protection or special recognition by the state that it is an important part of our environment and we're going to protect it. However, the Ichetucknee River and many of our springs and other rivers are currently impaired, and this designation essentially means nothing, at least in our state right now. In addition, many of you guys have probably heard of the Water and Land Conservation Amendment, better known as Amendment 1, which was supposed to allocate funds to environmental protection through the Land Acquisition Trust Fund. That amendment is currently in litigation by several other environmental groups who are arguing that the money is not being implemented correctly for environmental protection. So we'll see what happens with that. We're not quite sure where it's headed, but right now we believe that the state is not using the money as it was intended to be used. And out of the Water and Land Conservation Amendment, we got the Legacy Florida Act, which was announced by the governor. And the governor said that he was going to dedicate about $200 million a year for the Everglades, for restoration of the Everglades, $50 million a year for Florida Springs, and $5 million a year for Lake Apopka restoration. Just 2 weeks ago, I believe, we had the announcement of the projects that would be funded with that money. A lot of those projects were septic tank conversion. There was some land acquisition, but a lot of it was wastewater treatment projects and things like that. So we can already see that some of that money's been used for, and this was thought to be Amendment 1 money. It's being used for things that it necessarily wasn't intended for. So there are two problems with our current environmental structure that I've identified. The first problem with it is that our environmental structure is reactive. When we're dealing with environmental pollution, we're always thinking of it after it's occurred. How do we address environmental pollution that's occurring in our environment right now? Rather than being proactive and taking steps to prevent environmental pollution, we're dealing with it on the back end of it. And that's why Traci's going to talk about Earth jurisprudence when I'm done, and she's going to be talking about being more proactive about how we regulate our environment. The other problem is that these are great laws if they're being enforced. They're not being enforced by our state right now. And that's the biggest problem, is that if we don't have adequate enforcement of these laws, they're useless to us. They're not going to protect the environment. I thought this political cartoon was great when I saw it. It's an excellent assessment of what's going on in our state right now. Obviously, this is a comment on the issues down south with the algae bloom that we're getting and the Lake O discharges and how our fishermen are pulling in dead fish and the water smells terrible and our politicians are sitting on stacks and stacks of money. It all comes down to politics and money. And that's the biggest problem with our environmental protection system right now. It really depends on who's in charge of our political structure, how our environmental laws are enforced, or whether they're enforced. So that's why I put this chart up here for you guys, because I think a lot of people don't understand how much influence they truly have on the political process. The governor is elected by the voters. And I know this is kind of small, and I'm sorry about that. It's not even the entire picture, but this is the key environmental positions in our state. And we have members of the cabinet, all elected by us. The agricultural commissioner, who's in charge of the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, our attorney general, as well as our chief financial officer. In addition, we have several departments that fall under the governor's oversight. Our Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The secretary is appointed by the governor. The water management districts. The governing boards are appointed by the governor. In addition to that, whenever we bring a lawsuit against an environmental issue, we have to file in the Division of Administrative Hearings. The judges in the Division of Administrative Hearings are appointed by the governor. We can see the common trend. The governor is appointing some of the most important people in our environmental legal structure. So it's how the governor thinks that dictates how these agencies behave, whether or not they let a permit through, whose permits they allow through, whether or not they decide that they're going to enforce pollution controls in a specific area, on a specific water body. All depends upon how the governor is being influenced in Tallahassee. And so that's what's really, the one thing that I can tell you guys is how important it is when you're thinking about who you're going to vote for governor, and when you're thinking about who you're going to vote into the legislature, because they are making the policy that is affecting us downstream. So I think I've probably got time. Kathy can take me off stage if she needs to just do a brief case study about a local issue that a lot of you are familiar with, to show you how important it is to think about who we're voting into office, because that's gonna determine what happens with some of our biggest environmental issues. Everybody here probably heard about the chicken factory in Fort White. And if you didn't, just a brief overview. JTC Farms came in and they owned a piece of property that they wanted to build 12 poultry houses on, which would have housed each 22,000 to 26,000 chickens per house. That would have been 312,000 chickens at one time, around, give or take. And it supposedly would have produced about 15 tons of, they called it litter, we'll call it waste, per house, per flock, with 5 to 6 flocks per year. Believe it or not, this was not considered intensive agriculture. Sounds intense to me. So the biggest concern locally was that the Ichetucknee River and the Santa Fe rivers were very close to this piece of property. And if the waste was not contained properly, that it might leach into the groundwater and then contaminate the nearby water bodies, as well as people's wells that they were getting their drinking water from. The property was zoned as Agricultural 3, which allows non-intensive agricultural uses, and that's what the permittee said that they were doing, non-intensive agricultural uses. They were going to remove the waste. However, they were going to store it on site at some point, for some point of time. And there wasn't a lot of information given by the owner when they asked for an environmental resource permit from the Water Management District, who easily gave it to them. That was the only permit they were required to get, an environmental resource permit, even though this was probably a concentrated animal feeding operation, or a CAFO, which would have kicked in FDEP's authority as well. In addition, had it been termed intensive agricultural use, FDEP would have required several other permits, but FDEP never stepped in to require those permits. The county commission actually met and hosted a hearing and talked about this issue, and many people came out and spoke in opposition of the issue. The county commission was even interested in potentially putting some additional restrictions on this operation to make sure that water quality was protected. Unfortunately, there was this little thing called the Florida Right to Farm Act. The Florida Right to Farm Act, which was lobbied heavily by the agricultural industry, prevents local governments from putting additional restrictions on any farm where that farm says that they're instituting best management practices. The landowner told the Water Management District and FDEP, we're going to do best management practices. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Here's the problem with best management practices. They're voluntary. Nobody checks to see if you're actually implementing them or implementing them correctly. So there was no oversight on this piece of property, very close to two water bodies that are extremely important to the economy of this area and the economy of Florida. So again, this brings me back to the point of think about who you're voting for. The legislature passed the Florida Right to Farm Act after they were lobbied heavily by the agricultural industry. And it doesn't matter about water quality or water quantity to them. What matters to them is who's up there every day in their office telling them you need to vote this way because I'm pumping money into the economy. They don't think about our environment as an economic driver. They don't think about it as an important part of our state and the reason why we have high tourism numbers and things like that. So we need to think about who we're voting into office and whether or not we want them there next time around. I just want to talk a little bit about how do we change things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Traci because I think she has an excellent idea for how we look at things a little bit differently. First, like I said, vote. Engage in the political process. Talk to your legislators. They care more when you come to their office and say, I'm a constituent and I will or will not vote for you depending on what you're doing, rather than me going there and saying, I represent the Florida Springs Institute or the Florida Springs Council, and I want you to implement water quality and water quantity protections. They would rather hear from a constituent than me because that's the person that's voting for them and I may not live in their area. So that's very important. Also, when you're talking to your legislators, when you're talking to anybody, make connections between the environment and the economy. People get the economy. They want to talk about money when they're talking about anything in this state. So talk about money. Our environmental resources, our rivers, our lakes, our springs, they have an economic value. They bring money to the state, and they're an important part of our state. Itchitucknee Springs State Park, it was purchased for $40 million by the state. Well, we need to protect that investment. It's really important to us. We've put a lot of money into that. That was our money. Our taxpayer money was put into the purchase of that park. In addition to that, keep making noise. I know a lot of people are discouraged when a water permit is issued and you sat through that whole meeting and you told the governing board, I really want you to vote against this permit, and they voted for it anyway. I know that's discouraging, but keep making noise. Write op-eds to your local newspapers. Talk to the people that you live by. Talk to your legislators. Keep reminding them that you're going to vote for them next time around if they protect our environment and they protect our rivers and springs. And lastly, think outside the box about this issue. We have excellent environmental laws, but they're not being enforced. So how do we deal with that issue? Well, we have the current political structure that we have. And that's why I'm going to turn it over to Traci, who's going to talk a little bit about earth jurisprudence, which is a really great way to think outside of the box about our environmental laws and our environmental issues. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes. All right. So as Heather just said, oh, can you turn me up?
You're on. You're good. But you're not amplified.
Okay. So yes, we need to think outside of the box, right? Our Florida water laws are not working. And Heather did a fantastic job explaining to us why not. Now, it's my opinion that they're not protecting Florida's waters because they're really not designed to, right? Our laws are designed to allow for pollution. You heard Heather say, when she was defining TMDLs, right? The maximum amount of pollution, right? The maximum. Our laws are putting short-term economic gains over the long-term health of the environment consistently, right? We see it every day. Now, don't get me wrong, water laws have helped the state. Our rivers aren't on fire, right? They're not on fire. But what do we have? We have lakes, we have rivers, we have coastlines that are riddled with toxic algae, right? We see the degradation. It's right in front of us. And you know, I'm not saying that the economy isn't important. It's incredibly important. But like Heather said, healthy water drives a healthy economy in this state. That's the truth. And we're failing to reconcile that in our laws. So our laws are failing us. They're failing Florida's waters. And it's because our laws are failing to take certain things into account. They're failing to take in the interests of nature. They're failing to take nature into consideration fully. Profit over health. So there is a way to live in harmony with nature. And, these ecologically sustainable laws, they're what we're fighting for at the Center for Earth Jurisprudence. They're what we're fighting for at the center across the street. This is what we need. We need ecologically sustainable laws that will protect Florida's waters for future generations of species and for humans. So let's take a step back here. What are our laws designed to do? Laws are designed for what? Now, laws are intended as societal guidelines, right? As societal boundaries, if you will. They're intended to keep us safe. They're intended to maintain peace, provide justice, right? That's what they're meant to do. In the United States, we have laws for just about everything, for almost everything we do in our day, right? So we have battery is illegal because you don't want to be walking down First Street here and get punched in the face. We have to have driver's licenses because we don't want to drive down the road and be among reckless drivers. Physicians need to be licensed. Lawyers need to be licensed. Certain toxins aren't allowed in our food because it'll make us sick. But, we may not always agree with these laws, but typically we abide by them and we abide by this social contract because it benefits the greater whole. Now, our water laws aren't stopping unsafe fertilizer pollution in our waters, even in our outstanding waters. They're not making it illegal to pump an insane amount of water from our aquifer. We have water problems in this state, to name a few: suspended solids, an abundance of nutrients, fertilizer, animal waste, pesticides, overuse, overconsumption. And we're dealing with algae blooms. We're dealing with fish kills, with sedimentation, with health hazards. We're dealing with depletion of water sources, biodiversity loss. We're failing to take into consideration nature's delicate, albeit resilient, balance and interconnectedness when designing our laws and our policies. That's because we're not focused on nature. We're focused on us. Now, we're not focused on where we live. We're not focused on the natural entities that sustain us. We're focusing on us, on our pocketbooks, on our wallets. I really love this ego versus echo. I think it really says it all, right? So, as was announced earlier, my name is Traci, Deen, and I'm with the Center for Earth Jurisprudence, and we love to think outside of the box. It's our favorite thing to do when it comes to the law. We want to take the law as it is and expand it. Look for solutions. We're trying to be proactive rather than reactive, but we certainly need your help. And that's why we're trying to spread awareness on Earth jurisprudence principles, because it's going to take an army to make this change. So, what is Earth jurisprudence? I can tell you it's certainly a mouthful, right? What we are practicing is a type of law. Jurisprudence means philosophy of law. So we're also called earth law, wild law. And earth law, it incorporates environmental law, but it expands upon it. What we want to do is change the way that we interact with the natural entities that sustain life on Earth. Societal rules, like we discussed earlier, are often found in the law. So to us, the way that we address protecting and respecting nature long term is found in the law. So, Earth jurisprudence, ultimately, it recognizes the interconnectedness of Earth's natural systems, the inherent value of nature, and the dependence of humanity and all species on a healthy Earth. It requires a shift in how we legally protect the natural systems that sustain life on Earth with a more holistic approach. One that considers the good of the entire Earth community. And that means going beyond humans, but also taking into consideration other species as well, including future generations of humans and other species, by approaching the law through a lens focused on the health of ecosystems. But law through the lens of healthy ecosystems. One big challenge that we face is that people often feel that we are separate from nature, that we aren't connected, that we're above nature, that we own it, that we treat it like property, right? But we have to take into consideration the fact that we're part of this ecosystem. We're a part of the greater Earth community. We're dependent on healthy ecosystems, and we're contributing to them. So, logically, you would think that we would care very, very deeply about this place that we call home. If not for moral reasons, because it's the right thing to do, but for selfish reasons, because we're dependent on a healthy Earth, and we're dependent on a healthy Florida. But unfortunately, that's not the case, not yet. So I write down here that it unites us because I think that ultimately there is one thing that truly unites us all. And it may be rooted in basic instinct to survive, but we all are dependent on the need for healthy water, the need for healthy air to breathe, and the need for fresh and healthy food to eat. So when it comes down to it, we need our laws to reflect this. So our laws, however, are not putting an emphasis on protecting and respecting nature. Instead, we're dominating it, we're destroying it, we're depleting it, and we're making a profit off of it. We're not leaving much for other species or future generations. We're writing ourselves out of this story, right? But we are beginning to recognize that this world is finite, that the natural systems that sustain us are finite, that the aquifer is finite, that the springs are finite. We're beginning to recognize that. And I think in that, we'll find change. So, I want to talk to you about rights of nature. Our laws recognize human rights, right? And corporate rights, but not nature's rights. Nature has the inherent right to exist, to thrive, and to evolve. Nature has the right to live out its evolutionary process. And our laws grant rights to non-human entities regularly. We see how corporate rights can really dominate almost all other rights. Rivers have the right to flow. People have the right to clean water. Water has the right to be clean. And so when I'm talking about rights, what I'm meaning is that within the legal boundaries that we have currently, we have a standing issue. And that's legalese for being able to take something to court, legalese for being able to bring action. And right now, as the law is, in order to bring a lawsuit, you have to have standing. And nature doesn't have standing. Right now, there are certainly environmental regulations out there that prohibit detrimental behaviors that would harm a body of water, for example. We just heard about them. But ultimately, in order to bring suit, in order to bring legal action, you also have to show that not only was there injury to the environment, but that there was injury to a human as well. So it's not enough that the environment has been harmed, but you have to show particularized harm to a human as well. You also have to show that redress is available with a favorable court ruling. So you have to show that if the court rules in your favor, that you're able to fix whatever problem exists. And without that, the injury to the environment is not going to get to a judge. And that's what we want to change. That's why we believe nature needs standing in a court of law. Nature needs to have their inherent rights recognized within our legal systems. If we did that, then you, as maybe perhaps a guardian of nature, would be able to bring legal action, not because of any human harm, but on behalf of nature in its own right. You may be able to go to court and say that the Itchentekne is not well, and say that has nothing to do with human harm, but it's because the river itself has been maimed. That's going to change everything. So again, if Earth jurisprudence principles were implemented and nature was given standing in a court of law, natural systems and species could sue in their own right through human representatives, focusing the suit on the damage to nature rather than on human impacts. And I want to share with you one thing. This is happening. This is happening around the world. There are several countries that are recognizing rights of nature, and there are several United States municipalities that are also weaving these principles into their ordinances and protecting nature this way. But I want you to take a look at the Ecuador Constitution. Article 71, it happened a few years back. But nature has the right to exist, persist, maintain, and regenerate its vital cycles, structure, functions, and its processes in evolution. And every person, community, will be able to stand up in recognition of those rights. So I can give you an example. In Ecuador, a river was being sort of blocked off due to corporate building. And the people stood up and took, based on nature's rights, a case in front of a judge who found that the river had a right to flow and that it needed to be fixed, and that they didn't have a right to mess with the river in the way that they were. And it's a beautiful thing. That's how we protect nature long term. So again, we're thinking outside of the box here. There are several different legal tools that we do have that are proactive as opposed to reactive. Rights of nature we just discussed, but there's also the public trust doctrine and the precautionary approach. Now, the public trust doctrine states that the government holds in trust for the public natural resources and has no authority to substantially impair or monopolize resources crucial to the public welfare. Now, this does encapsulate some Earth jurisprudence principles, and it does give lawyers something to draw upon when making arguments that nature has the right to remain healthy. And while the public trust doctrine is inherently human-centered, right, we're still focusing on, with the public trust doctrine, on humanity's right to a healthy environment. It still will give greater consideration to nature down the line, and it is a promising legal tool that we can use in our fight to maintain a healthy environment for us all. Right now, actually, there are 21 youth plaintiffs in Oregon that are suing the federal government. I don't know if any of you have heard this, but they're suing the federal government based on this old law on the public trust doctrine. They're suing, and so far they're doing okay, but what they're saying is that the federal government holds the atmosphere in trust, right? And that they're failing to maintain it for future generations. They're failing to protect us from climate change. And they had a motion, the opposing side, the government, as well as several of the larger corporations that are fighting them on this, filed a motion to dismiss, and the judge said, no, we're going forward. This is something we need to talk about. Now, I included these two children here because I think that their quotes are they're brave and they're inspirational, but Victoria Barrett down here, climate change isn't just about temperatures and weather, it's about people. Our Earth will be here for millenniums. It's up to us to decide if humanity will be too. And I think that reiterates the notion that we're writing ourselves out of this story. So the one last legal tool that I want to talk to you about is the precautionary principle. Now, under a precautionary approach, and I want to preface this with, it's going to sound like common sense, and you're going to wonder why this isn't the law. So bear with me here, but under a precautionary approach, if there are threats of harm, the lack of scientific certainty of harm will not be a valid reason for failing to implement precaution or prevention of the harm. So employment of the precautionary principle in the law would anticipate harm and other environmental degradation through law and policy. And by adopting this precautionary approach, regardless of scientific uncertainty, we could be proactive and stop the harm prior to it happening. Now, again, I'm using Ecuador as an example because at the same time that they passed the Rights of Nature constitutional amendment, they also passed Article 73, which is that the state will apply precaution and restriction in all the activities that can lead to the extinction of species, the destruction of the ecosystems, or the permanent alteration of natural cycles. And wouldn't that be nice, right, if we had that in Florida, if we had that in the United States? Not yet, but we're working on it. The Center for Earth Jurisprudence attempted to get precautionary language in a Springs bill in 2014. Unfortunately, that bill died. In messages, we were very close, but essentially what we were fighting for, and many of you do remember this, it's that we were hoping that this language would get through. In implementing this act, the department and the water management districts shall take a precautionary approach to springs protection. The lack of full scientific certainty may not be used as a reason for postponing common sense actions required to protect springs under this part. Now, you won't find the word precaution once in the 2016 bill that just passed. Not once. Precautionary, no. Take precaution, no. Nothing. But one day, maybe we'll see this in the laws that govern us. I want to share this with you. It's about a minute long, but I think it's a solid summary on the kind of shift that we need to see within our societies. This is a wonderful job done by the Conservation International team, and this is Penelope Cruz as water.
I start as rain in the mountains, flow to the rivers and streams, and end up in the ocean. Then the cycle begins again. And it will take me 10,000 years to get back to the state I'm in now. But to humans, I'm just water, just there. Where will humans find me when there are billions more of them around? Where will they find themselves? Will they wage wars over me, like they do over everything else? That's always an option, but it's not the only option.
It's not the only option, right? We have to change the laws. This is Earth jurisprudence. What we are trying to do is give nature a voice in the law. So what can you do? Heather did a great job reviewing this, but vote, be vocal, stand up, don't stop, don't give up, say something, gather your community. We're seeing this happening all over Florida. Grassroots movements are what changed the world. Never underestimate the strength of your vote or the strength of your voice or the strength of your community, and I urge you to think outside of the box. So thank you very much for having me, Heather. Looking forward to
Okay, we're going to have some questions followed by some answers. And in order for Doug to get this on video, I already showed you how not to do this. So I'm going to hand the mic to the folks that have questions, and I saw you first.
Can you explain the very important process tomorrow in Tallahassee by the Environmental Regulation Commission and what they're trying to do to DEP for the people in the audience that may not know? Thank you.
Like I said, I've been following it a little bit, but basically the state is currently redoing its pollution control limits for certain pollutants that are going to be put into our water, and they're loosening those controls. Like I said, the Clean Water Act requires the state to establish water quality standards. Once they establish the framework for how they're going to do that, it's really a hands-off approach by the EPA. It allows the state to do what they need, and they approve pretty much anything that's sent to them under that framework. So what's happening tomorrow in Tallahassee is there's going to be a hearing by the ERC, Environmental Regulatory Commission, I believe, and they're going to be determining whether or not to allow these lower water quality standards to move forward. And some of them are either equal to or less than what the EPA actually recommends. But again, the EPA recommends it, it's not a requirement. And so I know there's gonna be a rally tomorrow in Tallahassee. There's gonna be that hearing, and they're gonna vote on that issue. There's been a lot of news on it, a lot of attention in the press. It's really important that we stay on top of this and make sure, hopefully they don't pass this. But like I was saying, the current political structure in our state points to that this is going to be passed the way that it is, that these lesser pollution control limits are going to be passed, and we're going to have a greater amount of pollutants in our water. We suspect that the reason that this is happening is not only that it's time, but some of the pollutants that are being allowed into the water for the first time, or they're increasing the amount allowed, are fracking-related chemicals. And we believe that this is the first step for Florida to allow fracking in our state. And so we need to be very vigilant, because that's an important issue. And again, I'm going to point towards how we vote, because that's going to determine who sits on that committee the next time around, because right now they're all folks that were appointed by the governor.
I would take a look and see your local legislators. They voted on fracking last year. Take a look at how they voted and spread the word.
And the local government is also vacant. The 2 representatives which would help the environment are not there. This was contrived by Mr. Scott, I believe.
And unfortunately, the majority is against them anyway, because there are more people on there that are going to vote against the environment than for it.
Your chart about our state government obviously focused heavily on the executive branch, but we're all aware, those of us, I happen to be a lawyer, this is not my field, but our Constitution and our setup of government does not allow our any branch of our government to just simply do what they want. When we pass laws through our legislature, we're not making suggestions or hints or gentle requests. We're actually telling them what to do. What is and there are mechanisms, of course, through our other branch of government, judicial branch, of requiring our government to do what we've told them to do. What is the history in Florida of litigation to require our state government to do what we have told them to do?
I can start it, and then I'm going to actually turn it to Traci. I learned when I was in law school about how our legal system works when it comes to the environment, and I hate to even tell people this because it makes me sad. Typically, when you bring an environmental action, when you're dealing with environmental laws, you bring it under the Division of Administrative Hearings. It's actually housed under an executive agency, and the judges are appointed by the governor. And Traci will talk a little bit about standing, because that's your first obstacle. But once you get past standing, you have to bring a case against the state alleging that there's an environmental issue, and the court has to adjudicate that. The court then gives a final order to the agency in which you sued, and the agency determines whether or not it wants to listen to the judge's recommendation. That's all it is, it's a recommendation, and the agency determines whether or not they're going to enforce it. So that's a big problem with our system. We're suing a state agent, typically we're suing a state agency, DEP, the Water Management District, and we're saying you're not protecting our environment. And you go through the judicial process under the administrative the administrative courts, and the administrative court gives a lot of deference, which means benefit of the doubt, to the agency itself. They tried, they did their best. And that's basically the standard. Did they do as well as they could? Yes.
Fortunately, though, we also have, pardon me for saying it, real judges.
I know.
As opposed to administrative law judges. And we also have the right to be in front of them. And that's sort of a different ballgame. And that's really what I was talking about. And the administrative division doesn't have exclusive jurisdiction over, just because it's environmental law does not mean you're excluded from the real court system. So that's what I was really getting at. What's been the history of suing in the actual judicial system?
It's not been good. So again, what you need to establish is not just environmental harm or a lack of implementation of the environmental regulations. You also have to assert a human harm. You also have to establish that you have standing to sue. And that's where it gets complex and almost darn near impossible to really stand up for nature when you see something horrific going on is because making the connection that not only nature has been harmed, but that you too have been harmed in some way, it's tough. And not only, again, you have to establish that you have incurred the harm, but that a favorable court ruling will not only address your harm, but also fix the greater problem. So it's tough. It hasn't been good. It's very tough to bring action as a citizen right now with the way standing is. Again, and that's why we're trying to get nature standing in Florida, but that hasn't been working out yet. Does that answer your question? It's ultimately standing.
I would like to ask a question. You say that we are politically responsible. I'm president of the Save Our Lakes organization. We're over 600 members strong. We're a 501c4 organization. How political can we be?
Political.
I mean, what can we do? I mean, I need specifics. What are we allowed to do?
You just researched this, but
I've been researching this extensively. I'm sorry. It's okay. Obviously, a lot of the nonprofit organizations in the state are 501c3s, and we have limits on how much political speech. You guys are a 501c4. You can lobby the legislature. You can you can endorse candidates for the legislature. Yes, and you can do that publicly, which we can't do as a 501c3s, or we have to be very, very careful about it. There's a certain amount of lobbying we can do. There's no amount of lobbying limits on you guys.
So we're capped, and we cannot endorse candidates. We can only endorse positions. But you're capable of not only endorsing the position, but perhaps endorsing the person talking about it, which is much different. So yes, I would definitely look into that and get active.
Yes, yeah, we need more organizations like yours because we have so many limits on ours. And the reason we're 501c3 is so people can take a tax deduction on their donation. They're more likely to support us. But if you're not donation driven, you can be a 501c4 and get very politically active.
Yes, and we would encourage you to do so.
You made a very good argument that everything follows money in Tallahassee, and also a very good argument that agriculture is at the root of a lot of our problems, especially with water. But these don't particularly add up because agriculture, okay, the gross domestic product of Florida is about $860 billion. The food and fiber, production of food and fiber is approximately a little over $8 billion. So we're talking about 1% with a multiplier factor, maybe 2% of the entire economy. Now, tourism, which accounts for a much larger part of our gross domestic product, is being negatively impacted by all of this, maybe by 10 or 20-fold. I don't know what it is. Why don't we see more of curtailing of the political power of agriculture by the tourism industry, and why don't we see that reflected in law?
Well, you're a fantastic advocate, and I would encourage you to get with the Save Our Lakes group.
No, he's ours.
Oh, but never mind. But I mean, you're a fantastic advocate. That's exactly right. Yes, that tie needs to be made. Heather made that point. It's exactly right. You have to tie the economy. Unfortunately, with the leaders that we have in office right now, you have to show them dollar signs. You have to show them why their vote is worth more than perhaps what was given to them on their campaign trail.
Right, I mean, Traci makes the point right there. It's the agricultural industry that's in Tallahassee every day saying, we'll help you out if you help us out. And they have a lot of money within the agricultural industry to be able to do that. Unfortunately, the environmental community is marginalized by how much money we're able to spend in Tallahassee, and also the lobbying issues. A lot of us are 501c3s, so we can't be up there every day. I'm a member of the Florida Springs Council, which is working towards being more politically active as an organization to start being in Tallahassee a little bit more, talking to our legislators, reminding them that agriculture is not what's driving the state economy, it's our environment.
Yeah, but tourism needs to do that.
And tourism too, yeah.
But tourism is so related to the environment.
Very much so.
Just a couple of quick comments rather than questions, and I apologize for that, but each of the springs seems to be focusing on their spring shed. And you may win a couple of battles along the way, but you're going to lose the war, because what drives those spring sheds is the pressure behind the spring, and that comes from the Trail Ridge and dominantly from the Keystone Heights area lakes, Lake Brooklyn and Lake Geneva. We've known that since the 1960s. Studies by Clark et al. Florida Geological Society, billions of gallons of water per year, which used to flow from those lakes into the upper Floridan aquifer at high elevation and pressurize the system, aren't happening anymore. We've got to fix that as a priority.
You need to go up to Tallahassee as well.
They don't listen.
I know that's true.
I would actually, being told by my boss, and I was going to anyway. You make an excellent point. The Springs groups are very much focused on local issues. The Florida Springs Council was formed in late 2014, and it is a group of all the Springs almost all the Springs organizations of the state. We're growing each and every day, and we're working on advocacy in the form of legislative initiatives, even legal action, as well as education. But the point is that it's all the Springs organizations in the state coming together to work collectively towards the restoration of our springs, the protection of our aquifer. So we're mobilizing towards that, addressing the issues on a statewide platform rather than local issues one by one.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing all of this. You know, it makes me crazy when I think about who I'm going to vote for, and I look online and I can't figure out who stole Amendment 1 because everybody spins it. Keith Perry didn't vote for fracking. And we really need that information, and I don't know how to get it, and I'm relatively capable of figuring out, but it's so spun. Couldn't a 501c3 give us that information as a issue? Who voted, who stole Amendment 1 from us?
I would caution away against actively being against any candidate in particular. That would violate.
I'm talking about a candidate.
But
who stole Amendment 1? What were the votes?
Well, I can speak to that actually. The Florida Conservation voters, I forget the name, they were the ones that helped push Amendment 1 forward, and then they reorganized as a 501c4, which allows them to get more politically active. They actually did a rundown of who voted for and against fracking. It's on their website. I don't know the exact URL, but it's Florida Conservation voters. Look them up, and right now they're actually going through the process of endorsing specific candidates that they believe are going to be better for the environment. So when you're looking for that type of information, I definitely recommend looking to that organization. I believe they addressed Amendment 1, but I can't be positive on that. But if you need more information from them, you're not seeing it on the website, contact the Florida Springs Institute, and I'll get you in contact with them. Mm-hmm.
So I did go to democracy school and it was so thrilling. I was telling everybody about it, and Lou was there as well. But we learned several things that the sort of boxes in there's the right of corporations have rights of personhood. The state can trump municipalities' actions. What was the biggest one? Anyway, there are several things that keep you from really making a movement or a law or some kind of citizen effort that will be the right of commerce, which is the basis of the Constitution, they said. So what would be the kind of course that you try to take so that you can maneuver among these things, or maybe just get enough publicity and local involvement that would bring attention sort of to circumvent all these restrictions that inhibit our actions as citizens or as legislators?
there are always going to be barriers in the work that we do. That's where we are right now. However, again, I would reiterate grassroots movements, community rights in particular, fighting for your right and as a community to protect the land that you share. Actually, in this upcoming year, the center is going to be asking all of you to help us because we're going to be proposing a constitutional amendment. Because we've asked ourselves that question: what do we do to protect nature when there are so many boundaries in place? And what we're going to try and do is propose an amendment with the Florida Constitutional Revision Commission that will protect our right to a clean environment and also protect the rights of nature. And it's not very likely to pass, but what we're hoping to do is educate Floridians on what it means and hopefully get enough action and steam behind us to make this a reality eventually. If not in this cycle, then maybe next time. But I mean, it's a very good question, and it's a very tough question, and we ourselves have to ask ourselves that often. How do we get around?
I just want to add to what Margaret said, because we were at Democracy School together. Democracy School is run by an organization up in Pennsylvania called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And I encourage everybody to go online and research what they're doing, because it's really groundbreaking work. What my takeaway quote from Democracy School was, the only thing that environmental laws regulate are environmentalists. Because the way the system is set up and the way the Constitution was written from the word go back in the days of the Founding Fathers, it was structured to give priority to business and commerce. Nature was not included. It was not on their radar. The country was brand new. It was huge. These issues were not even in anybody's mind at that point in time. But that's the structure that we have now. So we're starting, and I'm full disclosure, I'm now, for some unknown reason, on the advisory committee for the Center for Earth Jurisprudence. Thank you all for that. But when I first heard about Earth Jurisprudence and their work, and I was talking to some people about it, I got the reaction of, oh, I don't want to hear about that fluffy bunny rights of nature stuff. What was explained to me was the idea of rights of nature is an extension of the granting of rights that's happened in this country to the slaves when they were freed, granting rights to black people, granting rights to women to vote, granting rights to gay people, granting rights to children through things like the Guardian Ad Litem program. So if you look at it that way, it's a natural extension of expanding rights to things that have been left out of the process.
Lou's absolutely correct. And you can see why we asked her to serve on the board, because she's wonderful. But she's right. The law is not set in stone. It's ever growing and ever expanding, and it's ever changing based on the demands of society and our own self-awareness. So when we're recognizing that we are on a finite planet and that resources are finite and that we need to live in harmony and in balance with among one another and on this common home, our laws eventually, I am confident, will reflect that as well. But it will take awareness and it will take spreading the word. Thank you, Lou.
Any other questions from the group? Of course.
I was going to ask Heather a really nasty question, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow up on Ms. Kate's question, which I thought was great, on voting and how legislators vote. I spent a fair amount of time in Tallahassee last year and this year, and voting and endorsing candidates would be relatively easy if they actually had their votes on the record. The frustration I ran into, and it was really frustrating because I wasn't used to this in my former life, is you can go to a legislator and get them interested in an amendment or a thought, and they'll say, well, we'll help you with that. That's great. They don't follow through to the point where they offer the amendment in committee or on the floor, and they actually demand a vote on it, which is what they're there for. And I think the role of the loyal minority, loyal opposition, is to show those differences and show where the individuals and the parties differ. So we had a bunch of amendments last year that we took up there, and we actually got 4 of them brought up in the House and 4 of them brought up in the Senate on the water bill. And Traci mentioned the fracking bill, and there actually were amendments on there that were voted on because I guess they were politically sensitive enough that the leaders decided to force a vote on them. But if you can't get votes on these things, you have no way to judge a candidate. You'll go in and talk, oh, we'll help you. Yeah, well, great idea. We love it, Katie. Oh, wonderful. And then nothing happens, and you have no way of judging whether they're better than their opponent or not. So, you know, if any of you do go up to Tallahassee and get people interested in your ideas, get them to offer the damn amendment and get them to get a vote on the damn amendment, or we have nothing to work with.
Yep. Hold.
Yeah.
Hold your representatives accountable. Hold your government accountable. 100%. It is very hard to do.
And by the way, the reason it's hard to do, I think, is because people are afraid of retribution. Oh my God, if I don't vote with the leadership, they won't fund X project in my district. That's what's driving it, I believe. That's my opinion.
Come right back to you,
The idea has already been planted. Maybe we could even get Ted Yoho to admit that our earth and resources are finite. That's all we need to have him admit. And that's the main thing to push on, that the earth and our resources are finite. Once they've admitted that, they're pretty much admitted the truth.
Didn't hear a question there. Let's keep it to questions.
What is the meaning of life? You mentioned that a hearing or something is coming up that they may consider reducing restrictions on effluents, etc. Florida's been slimed. The entire world knows that. People coming down here have dropped off tremendously. That plus the fact that we have gerrymandering that has been, every time Bondi goes up on a constitutional issue, the court hands her a butt. With the change in districts, and with this coming up, and the fact that we've been slimed, do you really believe that these guys have chutzpah to actually go through and pass these lessened restrictions? Clean that up.
So, either one of you going to handle that opinion?
We're in agreement.
We conferred up here while the mic was being passed up, and unfortunately, yes, I think that they probably will allow those lesser restrictions to go forward. Even with all the press coverage on what's been going on down south, we need a leadership change in this state. That's really what's going to change things. I don't think that all of the embarrassment that we've been handing to them over the past couple of years has caused them to change the way that they institute policy. Rick Scott is always in the news for some other blunder that he's done, but yet he still continues to allow our environment to degrade. He says he's passing legislation to bring funding to springs, but those projects aren't really actually going to do anything to improve our springs health. They just are going to continue to do business as usual. We need to vote them out, and we need to change the leadership in our state. And that's going to take all of us getting together and making conscientious decisions about how we vote.
Some of us need to run for office.
That's a great segue to a question that I have. If there are elected officials or candidates running for office in our audience tonight, would you please stand and introduce yourself? Well, that's going to be easy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carol A. Daugherty, and I'm running for House of Representatives for the state of Florida for District 10. I have been to countless meetings through Suwannee County, Columbia County, Baker and Hamilton County, and I've seen all of the issues, and I'm trying to make all of the water issues that are affecting High Springs, Fort White, and the Suwannee River, as well as the Santa Fe River. I kayak these rivers, I swim in these rivers. I've been here, especially in 2012 when our rivers were hardly there at all. I was one of the first people to recognize the storks that came into High Springs and actually started nesting when the rivers were low enough, and the whole river all the way up became clear, and we brought divers in everywhere. I want to do something, and I want to be able to step up in front of the audiences and say, I'm for the environment, but I have to get into office to do that. I'm running against an incumbent that was instrumental in some of those changes, but she also voted for some of those. And, nothing to say against her. I'm sure she had good reason to do what she did, but I'm for the environment. I'm for the healthy tomorrow. And I'm just glad to be here, and I'm glad to hear you guys speak. Thank you.
Thank you. We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions if anybody. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there were some municipalities in the United States that had adopted a position that would be similar to Earth jurisprudence. They might be better examples for us to follow than Ecuador. Could you suggest what they are?
Yes, and I think we have your emails tonight, right, Lou? Okay, I'd be happy to send out the resources, but again, the website that Lou mentioned, they have been working on this extensively, and it's all up online. But yes, we will get those resources out to you.
Could you just tell us a few of the cities?
Oh gosh, not offhand. I'd have to pull up my folder in my laptop. But yes, I'd be happy to talk to you about the premise, but the actual city names are escaping me.
They were in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
It was Pennsylvania. All over the country. They were dealing with fracking specifically in Pennsylvania. That was one of the first places that happened.
Do you remember the names? Huh. Yeah. We will happily get those resources out to you.
Okay, we're going to call this our second to last question.
I know that some of the municipalities have sold some of their water sources. Is that affecting the amount of water in the springs? And are they contracting? Can those contracts be broken? How does that work?
Oh, I am so sorry.
Just a clarification, are you referring to bottling companies when you're talking about selling the water? Actually, the water bottle issue, I know a lot of people get really upset when a water bottling company comes in and says, I want 1.2 million gallons per day of water from the springs. It's a very small percentage of the withdrawals that we're seeing in our springs. Our heavy users are agricultural users that are pulling out water for large cattle operations or large crops. Although water bottling is something you want to pay attention to, I wouldn't say it's the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now as far as withdrawals that are affecting our springs and our aquifer.
I just wanted to make one quick comment. I started getting interested in the fracking issue in Florida a couple years ago, and there was no one more cynical than I. But I have to mention here the Floridians Against Fracking Coalition in Florida is a very active group. The lady here spoke about getting connections with our legislators. There's no group that does more than that I'm aware of. They know every legislator. They know when their term is up. They know how they voted, especially on environmental issues. And they put lists out of who's coming up for re-election when. And the group throughout Florida, they have conference calls weekly. And then the main group, one of which is Marilee Mowitz-Gibson, not here today, but she is one of the 4 main organizers in the state. She used to be with our Santa Fe River, still is, but now with Sierra Club. These people, we talk about saturation bombing in the Mid-East. Well, we have saturation calls when a crucial vote's coming up throughout the state. We have it planned a certain time, a certain number will call these offices, and their phones continually ring. And it does work. It did work with Senate Bill 318 last year. I couldn't believe it. Senator Richter got up before the committee and bald-facedly lied. He lied, and we were aghast. How can they do that? We found out later. Senators can lie. Anybody can lie to the legislative committees as long as you're not under oath, and it's done. This man told bald-faced lies about what was happening with his bill. It was not true. And I don't know who believed it, who didn't. But things like that happen. Bob was talking about, he's pretty calloused. He's been there, he knows what's happening. But anyway, my point is, work with your legislators and keep a list of what they're doing, what they're not doing. And I think, as they said here, one of the key things, vote them out, vote them out, vote them out.
I will say it's our understanding that the ban on fracking bill is intended to be filed again this year. So last year, of course, many of us were battling the regulatory bill, so the bill that would have regulated fracking, and you're correct, 318 did die, thankfully, and I think it is because the voice in Florida was so loud that they couldn't ignore it. But I do believe that this year there will be the bill, a similar bill that was filed last year that actually bans the practice in the state. And so if that is filed, I would encourage everyone to take a look at that as well.
They will. They may try again, but Ray Rodriguez, who said he may not, since there's so much opposition last year. Someone will, I'm sure. But Victor said he didn't reintroduce it because there's so much opposition.
Not the regulation bill, the ban. The bill that there was another fracking bill, Lester.
It was not introduced. Didn't even come up to it.
Jim will hold caucus after this meeting tonight. Lou, I'm going to give you the last comment, and then I'm going to thank everybody.
I just want to address the issue of agriculture and water pumping in this area, because I think we have correctly identified them as a huge drain on our water resources. But I want everybody in the agricultural community to know that when we say that, we're identifying a problem. We are not attacking individual farmers. We are not viewing you as the enemy. And that's a very practical reason for that is we're all in this together, and there are no solutions to our water problems here without agriculture. So I'm hoping that over time the Ichetucknee Alliance can open more dialogue with ag interests. I know our Santa Fe River is trying to do that too. And that's something that desperately needs to happen, or we're just going to be stuck in the same rut that we're in right now.
All right, everyone, would you please join me in a round of applause for our speakers, Traci and Heather? A great deal of thanks for your knowledge, your expertise, and your willingness to put the presentation together. We appreciate it very, very much. And to all of you, thank you for sharing your time, your questions, your energy with all of us tonight. Stay tuned for the next Water Voice series. Safe travels home. Thank you very much.